Hi, Paul. This is Brad Love. Thanks for having me. I know people say your show peaked at episode 70, but I disagree. It's been going from strength to strength. These questions from your audience are top.
In the last 5 years.
In the past 5 years.
In the last 5 years.
In the last 5 years,
what new belief,
behavior, or habit
has most improved your
career or well-being?
This is David Krakauer.
Nicole Rust.
David Poeppel.
Megan Peters.
I'm Jay McClelland.
So I'm Rodrigo Quiroga.
Congratulations on 100 episodes, by the way. That's amazing.
Congratulations on your 100th podcast.
Congratulations on 100 episodes.
But I just wanted to repeat, congratulating you again for your milestone. And I know it's been not easy for you to begin with, and to continue with. I think it's a massive achievement. I think it's helpful for the community. It really is. I think it's also what was really interesting was to hear from others personal things or very human things like, oh, I need more time to think about matters and I'm always bogged down doing stuff. And, I'm not thinking about it. And hearing from many others say, well, it doesn't make you feel alone. And sometimes the system seems to be pressuring in the wrong way. And that's probably a lot of what we are in at the moment. Yeah.
So let's talk about well-being.
Maybe.
This is Brain Inspired.
Man, you kidding me? That last bit there was from Federico Turkheimer. He was expressing his own thoughts about the people and ideas shared on Brain Inspired, which today turns 100 episodes old. And you heard a few of the names and voices of the many excellent guests I've had on the show, and whom you'll hear again today and over the next few episodes. What a fantastic and challenging and rewarding journey this has been so far. When I started the podcast, I was making a bet that there were enough of you that are like me and wanted a podcast that could go a little deeper than most of the science podcasts out there that are great in their own right, of course, but are geared toward the broadest possible audience. I made that bet knowing it was a poor business decision on my part, since it limits the size of the audience, of course, but I feel like it was the right decision, especially based on the many emails that you've sent me with stories about how various guests and episodes have influenced your thinking and even your careers in some cases. Many of you have enjoyed the challenge of staying with the often demanding subject matter. I know it's demanding. It's demanding for me. So I've put together a little collection of special episodes here to celebrate all the guests through the first 100 episodes, because they have made the podcast special, and I feel tremendous gratitude to them for spending their time with me. I feel tremendous gratitude toward you, the listener, also. Some of you have even decided to support the podcast through Patreon. I just passed the $10,000 per year mark through Patreon, which, if you think about it, sounds pretty tiny as annual income because, well, it is tiny. But I consider it a major milestone. I also appreciate every goddamn penny of it. And if that support continues to grow, I should be able to continue the podcast and continue to improve it. So thank you to the Brain Inspired Patreon supporters. Speaking of Patreon supporters, I reached out to them for this 100th episode celebration and asked what questions they'd like me to ask all of the previous guests. And I whittled down their responses to 6 questions. So the 100th episode will be in 6 parts here. And this is episode 100.1, I suppose. In this episode, the question many of the guests answered is, in the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? My own answer to this is, wait for it. Obviously, it's starting the podcast and sticking with the Brain Inspired podcast. And that includes, for me personally, stepping away from academia to do so. So I don't know what the future brings, but I do know that I continue to learn a ton by doing the podcast, and I know I'm helping more people than I ever could have if I'd stayed in academia. So for now, this is right for me. So I took all of the responses and randomized them because there's enough variety that it didn't make a lot of sense to group them into categories, and I wanted something else besides alphabetizing them. Also, through these 6 episodes, I'm sprinkling in a handful of reflections that I received from listeners, especially Patreon supporters, about how the ideas and concepts that have been shared through Brain Inspired has affected their own thinking, which I think will be fun to hear as well, and will serve as little intermissions along the way. I've listed all of the guests in their order of appearance in the show notes, with links to their previous episodes if you're interested in hearing more about them. That is at braininspired.co/podcast/100-1. Thank you to everyone who has made this show possible. I hope you all pay attention to all the advice and personal experience that you hear throughout this episode and use it to improve your own career and your own well-being. All right, here we go.
This is David Krakauer. What new belief, behavior, habit has most improved your career or well-being? Well, that's hard, but one of the things I guess that I at least have come to terms with is the distinction between productive work and busy work, and feeling at ease with not doing busy work. And the way that I do that actually is in any given day, I write down a list of one substantive item that I should accomplish and several obvious reactive or, work-related items where there is a response expected. And I just tick them off, and having completed those items, if I complete them in 2 hours, I'm now free for that day. And I'm free to do absolutely anything I like without any feeling of guilt. And that means it spares up huge amounts of time to read. And most of us, I think, feel a little bit ill at ease reading. It's almost as if it's a zero-sum game with production. But we all know at the same time that without that requisite background, our work will dry up. It will freeze. And so that's helped a lot. And it's led to much higher levels of productivity. And so I just don't do all that sort of partial, dilute activity that distracts us from the awareness that we're not doing anything profound. I now know that I've finished, and I now know that I can indulge in any habit. I could just walk for 3 hours, and that's fine too. And I find that also helps a great deal, actually, in thinking through problems that I've got stuck on. So, in short, a very modest list, only one item of any real significance, and then a feeling of total freedom once that list has been ticked off to pursue any activity that I enjoy, and where the reality is my subconscious mind, brain, what have you, is doing work that I simply couldn't do if I was just sitting in front of my computer, fooling myself into thinking that I was being productive.
David Poeppel, and I work at NYU and at the Max Planck Institute. For many years, I, like many of us in neuroscience, obsessed about getting better and better about measuring things, right? So for many years, we thought, well, if we only had better temporal resolution, if we only had better spatial resolution, if we can measure everything all the time, we're all set. And the one thing I've learned in the last 5 years is I'm not missing temporal resolution, and I'm not missing spatial resolution. I'm missing conceptual resolution. I just don't have the right ideas to make substantive progress. That's where things are falling short right now for me.
I'm Jay McClelland. A few years ago, I was on sabbatical in London, and just when I discovered that DeepMind had come into existence, and I had a colleague who I'd worked with before who was working at DeepMind, and I got a chance to visit, and it convinced me that some really exciting new developments were happening. So I decided to, a couple of years later, I decided to approach them and see if they would let me come hang out with them a little bit. And they did. And it's been just totally amazing for me. Gave me an opportunity to meet all these amazingly insightful individuals and to learn more about what's going on at the cutting edge of deep learning research, especially deep learning research that's really focused on, trying to achieve artificial general intelligence. So, I don't DeepMind has goals which are not quite the same as mine. My goal as a psychologist is to understand how the human mind works. But it's just been truly awesome to have a chance to hang out with those guys and think about, the kinds of things that humans still don't do and that artificial agents are beginning to do, and also the ways in which humans are still doing things that our artificial agents aren't. So that's been an amazing opportunity.
It's Patrick Mayo. So, in the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? I think it's sort of a pretty basic answer, but time management is a big thing. I think the further along you go, the more important time management becomes. And having started as a faculty member within the past year, that's definitely been true. I considered myself a pretty organized and efficient person, but it was time to step up my game, apparently. So I've had to work on that, but that's been the most helpful thing.
Okay, so my name is Marcel van Gerven. I'm chair of the AI department at the Donders Institute. What I did learn is that as I grow a bit older, it started to make me realize that I have finite time left, which also means that I have to make choices on the things I find interesting, but also importantly, the things I don't find interesting, right? That can help a lot in focusing.
Blake Richards. Yeah, one of the best things for my personal well-being in the last year or two has been achieving inbox zero on a daily basis.
Hi, this is John Krakauer. I think the thing that has actually really improved the way I think about things that I care about the most has been, in fact, to start the salon and work on a book for the general public. I would say those two challenges have really made me think about what interests me the most in science more than when you're doing it in terms of having to have a lab and get grants and write papers and design experiments and consider the careers of grads and postdocs and junior faculty. If you're actually doing it more from a sort of hobbyist standpoint, okay, I'm going to read everything so I can write a book about it, or I'm going to read so that I can talk about it with interesting people. It's a different way to approach your subject. Does that make sense? That's what I've discovered, is it's a different way in. But that's what I would say about that. That actually, doing what you do, Paul.
I'm Mario Negrello. I work at the Rotterdam Department of Neuroscience in the Netherlands. And I've been listening to the Brain Inspired podcast for a while now. And one of the things that really comes across the most is how we as a community come together and converge into our beliefs more and more, forming a sort of a meta mind of the neuroscientist, a meta neuroscientist. And Paul has been interviewing these neuroscientists, channeling us. And this really is a great representation. It's often these dialogues that I would like to have, that I did not, but in fact I did via proxy.
Nicole Rust. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? I would say lumens. So over the past handful of years, I've rediscovered again and again that in the winter, I can't drink enough coffee to really feel myself. So about a year ago, I did a bunch of research into seasonal affective disorder and light treatment, light therapy for that. And I even purchased a light meter to determine how much light I was getting throughout the normal course of a day. And I discovered that even on a cloudy day, a good walk outside gets you a super dose that's equivalent to what light therapy prescribes on most days. And so I have made that a habit, and it's done a tremendous amount for my health and well-being on these cloudy days.
Megan Peters, University of California, Irvine. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? So for this, I'd have to say that learning to say no and learning that it's okay to say no and trying to do a better job in general at risk and benefit analysis to protect my time, this has probably been the one thing that I'm still working on, but that is making a very big difference in my life. When you're a postdoc, you feel like you have to say yes to basically like everything. You've got to be really hungry. You have to grab every bull by the horns and just like go for it, because you feel like every opportunity is like the opportunity that's going to make the difference in whether you make it in academia or industry, whatever your chosen career is. But even when you're a postdoc, but especially when you become independent as an academic, you can't say yes to everything. There's just like not enough time in the day, and you're going to kill yourself and you're going to be miserable. So you have to be okay with saying no, and you have to learn to say no. You have to learn to weigh your options, like the risk-benefit analysis, the value proposition of like every opportunity. And I've made a lot of mistakes over especially the past few years and earlier. I'm getting better at it. But I feel like learning not only to say no, but that it's okay to sometimes say no to things. That's really an important first step.
Andrew Saxe here. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? I like the quote from Amos Tversky, who said, the secret to doing good research is always to be a little underemployed. And I think I think I've come to appreciate that focusing on the quality of time spent on a project and the final output is more important than long hours per se. And obviously sometimes you have to work hard, but I guess I come to feel like this research endeavor is really running a marathon, not a sprint. And so having a rich life and living well is quite important to the long-term health of science. I really think it is. We need to make science an attractive career where someone can thrive in that role. And I think that's going to lead to long-term success. Darwin also, I think, worked supposedly 4 hours a day and then went for long walks. I'm not saying necessarily that approach works for everyone, but, if it worked for Darwin, it can't be that bad.
Federico Turkheimer, Institute of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neuroscience, King's College in London. The thing that has helped me, particularly in the last year, I was given a lot of time to prepare a new undergraduate course. It's called Neuroscience and Psychology, and it's a course which is new in the sense that we're really trying to connect the biology with the psychology, and we're trying to do that for undergraduate students using computation and coding. This is really new, and it was scary at the beginning, but it really allowed me and others to take time, read the literature in depth, reach the sort of large overview on one hand, but also trying to teach something practical and useful. And I know, so that was the same attitude I had when I started this. And at the end of that, you look backward and say, I'm really grateful for that. I'm really grateful for that pressure. I'm really grateful for that time and the ambition. That was, something that needed to be done. Just take time, think about it. How are we looking at the brain today? And particularly at its disorders. Is there anything new from the way we were taught 10, 20, 30 years ago? Of course it is. And I think you need to coalesce all this material into some sort of clean, clear, accessible, practical set of lectures. Okay, so I hope that will be useful.
So I'm Rodrigo Quiroga, neuroscientist at the University of Leicester. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? Well, I think in general terms, it's looking outside our typical sources as scientists. It's going outside the standard knowledge that we find in books, in papers, in knowledge that is spread by colleagues and seeing what other people outside our field thought about the questions we deal with. And in particular, this year I published a book called Neuroscience Fiction. So I spent quite some time looking at science fiction and seeing how much what some people thought, like writers or filmmakers or so on, are, how much these things link to current research in neuroscience. And there was one particular question that really, captivated me, which is what makes us humans. In particular, I was interested in thinking what makes us humans in comparison with artificial intelligence, and what makes us humans in comparison with other animals. So what makes us more intelligent to chimpanzees or any other species. So how this changed my career is, well, at first, when I was writing this book, it was kind of like a curiosity. I just wanted to know, what people thought about. But then I started thinking, how can I really tackle this question? And what experiments could I do? Since I do recordings in humans, I can record single neurons in humans to see if there's something special about the human brain, which leads to our unique intelligence. So, yeah, I think that was a major change.
Thomas Naselaris, Department of Neuroscience, University of Minnesota. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? To me, it is increasing the number, quality, and intensity of collaborations. I think that, in my case at least, my feeling of accountability to friends and colleagues that I shared ideas with and made plans with is probably the single strongest motivation that I have that compels me to actually get things done. The other motivation is curiosity, but that's just a motivation to get out of bed in the morning. Being curious doesn't mean you'll actually produce anything. But having friends who've done work on behalf of a project that you're invested in, that really makes you want to get things done. And it also increases your sense of connection to a community of ideas and of people. So that's what's been helpful to me.
Hello, Paul. This is Steve Potter from the Georgia Tech Laboratory for Neuroengineering. Okay, and finally, you asked in the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? So a realization that's hit me in the last 5 years is that the academic research model is just too slow. I have seen fantastic rapid advances by Neuralink and Kernel, OpenAI, and the Allen Institutes especially that have convinced me that we will get to understanding and emulating the brain much faster when billionaires fund such research, either for commercial or philanthropic reasons, rather than individual academics having to apply for and win government grants to get a tiny incremental step accomplished with a small team of researchers. We should take the neuroscience efforts of billionaires more seriously. I sort of feel like people are writing off these guys because they're not real neuroscientists, but guess what? They have a lot of money and they can hire the best people, and those people are really moving forward quickly. So I think that's the big idea that has really, I wouldn't say it's improved my career because I have gotten out of doing research myself, but I think many neuroscientists would benefit by putting more stock into what's going on in these big, well-funded labs.
This is Brad Love from UCL. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? I think I took the field a bit too seriously to my detriment, be it personally, creatively, or in terms of productivity. I always found it a bit maddening what people got excited about and valued. And I mean, don't get me wrong, some celebrated work is fantastic, but that's not universal. Then I thought about my life outside science. And so, when it comes to wine, I like these obscure French biodynamic natural wines. When it comes to music that I listen to on Spotify, there's like fewer than 2,000 listeners around the world. I live in a neighborhood in London where the ride started and I like it. So putting it all together, I realized that, maybe these pop metrics of popularity are not the ones for me in any aspect of my life. And so really just thinking about how would that apply to science, so maybe, some pop science is not for everyone. And I should produce things that I appreciate for others who will get it. It'd be great if everybody liked what I did, but that's probably not possible for what I would find valuable personally. So I've always been internally directed, just more so now, and explicitly realizing that has been helpful. So I think this has helped me break a bit with the structures of the field, and it should lead to more interesting work in the future.
Hello, Paul. Congratulations on your podcast. I've been listening to it for the last year and a half almost now, and it's helped me a lot to focus and actually get to know better this field of artificial intelligence related to the brain. And the interview that has helped me the most was the one with Dilip George from Vicarious, because he and his team is working on something similar to the thesis of my PhD here in Spain. And actually, I've used their algorithm of recursive cortical networks published in 2017 in my project. So thank you a lot for actually taking the time and effort to meet all these amazing people and make available this information to the rest of us. I think you're doing a great job, and please keep on.
I'm Steve Grossberg, so here goes. In the past 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? Well, I love to travel and often flew to give invited lectures all over the world. I particularly love to be invited to lecture in my favorite cities in Europe and Asia, but flying all around America was also always a treat. In 2019, I flew multiple times to give keynote lectures in Europe and across America. Each long flight, unfortunately, ended with a cold that triggered a serious asthma attack. And one of those attacks led to pneumonia and landed me in the hospital for several days, where I was really seriously ill. COVID made flying impossible. I've still been able to give keynote lectures and conferences that were supposed to occur in Italy, Scotland, and Thailand this year, but instead gave them virtually via Zoom. Not only am I home for dinner, but I also have had no colds or asthma attacks this year. I've therefore decided never to get on an airplane again to give a lecture. It's an easier decision to make now than in the past, because I've been flying all over the world for over 50 years and have many precious memories from those trips.
Talia Konkle.
Okay, in the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? Maybe, this is not a good answer. Maybe when I separated Slack, this is like process of doing science, when I separated Slack from my email and I made sort of all my lab research and communications happen in Slack channels dedicated to each project. And that left my email for more admin, and sort of separating those out really let me not have to toggle back and forth between science and admin when checking my email, and I can really focus on advising, and that as when I'm doing that, and I can focus on admin when I'm doing that, and that habit, I suppose, has improved both my career and well-being. I'm going to go with that. Okay.
This is Paul Cisek from the University of Montreal. Well, in terms of well-being, the biggest thing was the birth of my son, which was actually 8 years ago. So I guess it's not quite so recent. But it just made such a big difference that, when you say anything new, everything else just seems like it's not that different, not such a big deal. My life is so different now because of him. You have kids, so you know what that's like. But in terms of career, things have been pretty steady, but the biggest improvement is that I finally started really reading about evolution, spending a lot of time reading a lot of new material to me about evolution of the brain as part of writing a book. And so the book will still take many years. But in the meantime, I'm learning so much stuff that my view about the brain is really becoming changed. And also it's given me a renewed passion for the science of the brain. So, that's really added a lot to my sort of level of excitement. On the downside, I must say that somewhat concerned that all this kind of leads me away from a lot of the things that other people are interested in, because I'm just getting so excited about these questions that a lot of the people in my field, they're interested in other questions. So it's almost like I'm removing myself from the conversation, which is a little bit concerning. But anyway, I'm enjoying it a lot. So that's really been a big deal.
Can I ask you a side question about that aspect?
Yeah.
There's a possibility. What do you think about the possibility that it's actually beneficial to remove yourself from the mainstream, and that in the long run, that is that will be a helpful, you have to have a lot of patience, but that will be a helpful thing for your career and, your legacy as well, because you're not just doing what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I think in principle, it would be good. As long as you come back, right? If you just go off on something that nobody actually is interested in, then not only, does whatever contribution you have just get ignored, but you can kind of go off in the deep end. You kind of need other people's opinions every once in a while to bring you back to earth and critique you a little bit. So, but if you're just off on your own like a hermit on the outside of the village, that's not so good. I don't want to be that person.
Kanaka Rajan. I like this question a lot because, it had a certain, professional feel and a little personal aspect to it also. So let me start by saying, what is the biggest belief or behavior change that has affected or improved my career or well-being? And that has been changing up the dynamics of a standard academic mentorship model in how I run my lab. So I did two things. First of all, I picked people better than me to work alongside, and that has upped my own game. It's almost like, if Serena Williams were my weekend tennis partner. The second thing I did was that, my postdocs are not my trainees as they're normally referred to in the field, but they're, colleagues on a level playing field. And so, those two things have, significantly improved productivity, sense of well-being, morale, everything professionally. And so working alongside people of a higher caliber has just changed my career. Now, personally, the creativity question appealed to me. I strongly believe that having a serious interest that is not just, science or work is crucial to staying sane, to staying grounded, through, many of the winding and rocky roads in academic science. And so, some people run marathons, some play instruments, dabble in electronics. I draw, so I've, always been an obsessive doodler, but, now I've been making a much more consistent effort. And I recently realized that my style of drawing has a name, drawing from life urban sketching. And, I found out that the concept goes back to the Lascaux cave painting days. So tens of thousands of years back. And since starting to do this more, I've come in contact with, brilliantly creative people outside of the scientific academy who have, accidentally improved my scientific work in weird and interesting ways. So that would be my thing. Develop something that is a serious interest outside of work.
Hello, my name is Grace Lindsay, Gatsby Computational Neuroscience Unit at University College London. In the last 5 years, what new belief, behavior, or habit has most improved your career or well-being? Kind of seems like those two goals are at odds. But I would say something that has improved probably my career, and I think my well-being, has been to just be more organized with my code, like learn the, tips and tricks that people who are properly trained in writing code do, and just auto-generating files that store parameters so that I remember what parameters I've run when I run simulations and stuff like that. Probably a lot of things that, most people who are trained properly in this do automatically and for good reason. But as a researcher, you're not really trained how to write code correctly. And so things are usually a bit chaotic for me in my code, and just being a bit cleaner about that, I think, has probably helped me a lot in many ways.
My name is Konrad Kording. I'm a neuroscientist at the University of Pennsylvania. So let's talk about well-being. One thing that has really helped me is that I always make sure that I spend sufficient amount of time preparing my coffee. So I always have nice latte, and that just brightens every day. What also is important for my well-being is that I really focus on spending quality time with my family. I don't work 60 hours a week. I start in the morning around 9. I'm always finished by 6 p.m. and I don't generally work on weekends. There's very few exceptions where I will work out of that interval. And this putting focus on time with the family really, I think, also helps me feel better about myself.
I'm Mark Humphries at the University of Nottingham. Something really simple is just dramatically simplifying my to-do list. So for a long time, as a postgrad, and as a postdoc, I spent years searching for a way to organize all of my thoughts and ideas into something that would let me know what to do every day. So I'd spend a lot of time thinking about looking at different systems and thinking about ways of organizing this stuff, and I tried lots and lots of ways. Eventually, I ended up something of a getting things done aficionado, which is a productivity system that is used all over the world. It's got a best-selling book attached to it, and it looks really complicated, and it kind of is quite complicated. Underneath, though, is a very simple idea of every task that comes in, you either decide to do it right then, or you put it in some kind of management system that you completely rely on to keep track of what you're doing. And that works really well for your immediate decision making. But what it tends to do then, it means that your program you're using or your notebook you're using to keep track of all these things, it just explodes with these tasks that you haven't done. And then when you review them, you have this massive information dump of stuff that you haven't done every time you look at it. So with GT, with getting things done, because you're constantly aware of this big task list, I found that I was putting too many things on each day. So there's so many things labeled as the next thing to do that it became almost impossible to decide what was the next thing to do. Until sometime last year, I just sort of stopped using it completely. I started just on a piece of paper writing down the 1 or 2 things I would do tomorrow. And suddenly, after years of telling myself I need to build more time into my day, more slack, so I can cope with things coming in I don't expect. Suddenly, magically, I have all this time. So I'm now satisfied with most of my days of work because I've done the thing that needed to be done that day. And then when things come in that are unexpected, I can do something about them. Case in point being talking to you right now, that I read the email from you this morning saying, can you talk this afternoon? And normally I would look at my to-do list a year ago and I've gone, I promised myself I would read this paper and I would answer this stuff and I would do this form and I would do this today. So we'll move that to next week or push it in the future. But now it's yes, okay, I can do this afternoon.
My name is Alex Ivanov and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Oxford, working in the labs of Andy King and Kerry Walker. And I work broadly in computational neuroscience and auditory neuroscience, looking at how the brain encodes auditory information. Yeah, I think the show has influenced me in many ways. First of all, it was really nice to get familiar with a lot of different research topics and to learn a lot about different researchers that I've not necessarily heard about before. For example, Olaf Sporns, I totally didn't know about him, and it was super interesting to learn, but so many other ones, it would be too long to enumerate all of them. And another thing is, apart from the scientific content, I also really enjoyed that a lot of the guests would share a little bit of their personal stories and their lives, and that kind of influenced me as well and kind of made me more confident to do certain choices that I was planning to make. And I also really enjoy how the conversation is rather spontaneous, like you're just talking about stuff. And although sometimes it can be quite focused, and I can learn a lot about certain things, like let's say your conversation with Carsten Stringer on dimensionality reduction, that was actually quite useful. But very often it's also just the person is free to speak and it feels very spontaneous. And sometimes I sort of mentally imagine that I'm just hanging out with you guys in some bar or something and you're just chatting about neuroscience, especially if I'm doing something relaxing. Yeah, so I think that's also pretty cool. Like the atmosphere of like the show. And the fact that there is also no ads. I think like so many other podcasts have these annoying ads. My original background is for molecular biology and biochemistry, so I tended to think about things very mechanistically. And one of the reasons why I went into sensory neuroscience is because I enjoyed how you have control over stimuli and you can sort of have this neat little thing going on for you. But then listening to guests like John Krakauer or some like other people as well, I realized that it's much more complicated than that. And actually, it's really worth thinking about the cognitive side, and that you don't necessarily need to have like a molecular or circuit mechanism to have deep understanding of like something. And there's many ways to understand like a certain system. And I think for me, this was quite a valuable lesson. Yeah.
Brain Inspired is a production of me and you. I don't do advertisements. You can support the show through Patreon for a trifling amount and get access to the full versions of all the episodes, plus bonus episodes that focus more on the cultural side but still have science. Go to braininspired.co and find the red Patreon button there. To get in touch with me, email paul@braininspired.co. The music you hear is by The New Year. Find them at thenewyear.net. Thank you for your support. See you next time.
The stair